This is Restless. Welcome back to Restless, the young, restless, and reformed postmortem podcast. Though today, it's a stretch by any means to call it that. My name is Matt Klein. I am joined by Pastor Michael Bowman. How are you doing today, Pastor Michael?
I'm good. I'm on vacation this week, but not from Restless. We don't do vacation from Restless. I mean, sometimes we do. but
friends, we are going to try and make this vacation day a sweet day on Restless for Pastor Michael as I regale him with tales. Pastor Michael, I am at a point in my life where it's a dangerous thing, where about 50% of my personality could become the Shroud of Turin if I'm not careful, if you know what I mean. So the real danger is if you know me in real life and it's like, you know, whatever you're saying, like, you know, that relates to the Shroud of Turin. Let me stop you right there and start talking about this. So Pastor Michael, I think we could potentially launch a wonderful podcast called Shroud Talk.
Shroud Talk. Welcome back to Shroud Talk.
Welcome back to Shroud Talk.
Hey, if somebody wants to take that, that's yours. That's a freebie
yours
from us here at Restless. If you want to start up Shroud Talk, that's all yours.
But, Pastor Michael, there's things that have happened in the past few weeks that made me wonder, think about the quote that we've talked about from John MacArthur a number of times, that the modern evangelical church is more in need of reform than the medieval Roman Catholic Church. And we've discussed the truth of that statement and people who disagree with it. But there's something fascinating that I think pretty much inarguably relics are back. And I don't mean just in the papacy or amongst Roman Catholics. I mean, relics are just back.
Yeah.
And today we are going to discuss one way the relics have become back. So let me start. So Pastor Michael, I've been minding my own business. I've really unplugged from a lot of social media in a short period here. But there was this thing I couldn't help but seeing over and over again. And it was all these people sharing this, what we call here in the Presbyterian world, a second commandment violation. People were sharing this image supposedly of Jesus, and I was seeing it everywhere.
Yep.
Couldn't not see it, and people talking about how it was amazing, how they were encouraged by it.
Yeah, it was exploding.
And what's fascinating is where that image comes from. So, Pastor Michael, you know I am a user and participant in the AI world. This image was apparently produced by people using an AI production, 3D rendering of the photo negative from the Shroud of Turin. And so, Pastor Michael, I did pull it up for you and I. When you look at this image here, Pastor Michael, I had someone tell me who this looks like, which I found pretty fascinating. What's your thought about this image now?
It is that one British comic. What's his name? Kind of
someone did. I had someone tell me it could be Russell Brand, but someone.
Yes, that's what I've seen a lot of those comparisons. He does look like Russell Brand.
But could a thin Jared Leto even hit it?
Yeah.
Right on the nose.
Heavy Jared Leto vibe, actually.
Very
even
much.
More so. With the kind of sunken, sunken cheeks, which is a very Jared Leto thing. I just saw Jared Leto in a movie recently, I think, and it was that. I mean, very much so. That kind of sunken face. Yes. Very thin, kind of gaunt.
Yes. So, the other thing I would say about this image is, it also looks like what everyone has always apparently thought, like the Messiah his physical features would basically look like. We've rendered a long hair, bearded, fairly good looking, soft featured man.
Yep.
Right. Now, Pastor Michael, so you saw this image blowing up. What would you say? What did you see in the world as this image blew up before we go into where it came from?
Yeah. So obviously, I've known what the Shroud of Turin is before, but I was telling you off air that I have never cared.
Right.
And we can talk in a little bit about how, some people might hear that and think, oh, that sounds wrong.
Yes.
And why that would be, or even the fact that we're comparing this image to Jared Leto and to Russell Brand. There's going to be people that are like, that is an impious way to be speaking. And we can talk about that because
should we
I think
start there or end there? I'll let you make that.
I think we should end there. I think that's a good way to end because we need to go into some of the background just for me. But I do.
So if you're horrified, stick around to the end where we explain why.
We'll explain why we can do that. I've just never cared that much. And so even when it was crossing my feed like crazy, by the way, I mean, everybody was talking about this. I still just mostly passed it up. But what I read is you can fill me in that, some new technology recently has caused people to think actually this, like the Shroud of Turin is older than was once thought. And so that's my understanding of where we're getting into this and why it's coming back.
Yeah. The real reason it's coming back is because an X-ray was done on the image and it was ran through AI and it produced this.
Okay, so that's what really happened.
That's really
and I told you I didn't care.
And so there is a discussion. There's always a discussion. There's an ongoing discussion over its age, which we will come to in a moment. But yeah, there's been a discussion for a long time over as I said, my personality has become partially the Shroud of Turin. And so there is a discussion over the appropriateness of dating it. And so let me run through a little of this, the history, because we should not say that there is no mystery to it. This is one of the most enjoyable, a thing you can actually enjoy about this is that this is very much a mystery from history. There are mysterious things about this. We don't have to pretend like they're not, because this, that actually opens you to a worse position. So the other thing that is, we'll come back to the dating method. So first, the Shroud of Turin, in case someone doesn't know, it is a 14-foot long linen cloth that claims to have been, the burial shroud of Jesus Christ. And this burial shroud, let me find an image to show Pastor Michael. Here's the full-length image. So here is this, and this is obviously by the way, everyone in their mind who knows what I'm talking about and is thinking about this, every image of this you've ever seen, by the way, is highly doctored and highly produced so that you can actually tell. So if you see kind of here on the bottom of the image, Pastor Michael, you can see what looks like the imprint of a naked man with his face, legs, hands.
Yeah, you can see like a body.
Exactly. There. And so the claim, of course, is that this was the burial linen of Christ, and there are different ways, but basically it's that there is a miraculous reason for the imprint of his body being there, right? That it's not really the idea that it is blood or sweat or whatever, though there is some discussion of that. It's basically that somehow this miraculous image of Christ has been retained. Now, the shroud, the other thing is, let me show you a slightly more interesting thing. This is the real deep and abiding interest in the shroud came from when we invented creating photos and then making their photo negative. So if you look at the
by the way, that photo negative does not look like the AI version.
Yeah, this is the other problem, even with the AI thing, is
dude, there's no Jared Leto in that one at all.
And the AI was create a photo of Jesus from this photo negative. They think he looks like Jared Leto. Here you go. And everyone went, wow, so encouraging, so positive. So you can
positive, encouraging K-Love.
The Shroud of Turin.
Shroud of Turin.
Who I'm sure has
Shroud Talk on K-Love.
Who I'm sure has said encouraging things about the AI photo, about how it can encourage your faith. Because we're all into relics. So as you can see, Pastor Michael, the image on your left is actually not a very impressive, and I don't mean this in not mysterious. We'll come to that, but it's not a very clear image. It's not very crisp. It's very even hard to tell.
That's the original, correct?
That's the original.
That's what you just see. If you just look at this cloth, that's what you would see, or
yes. And I don't even. This could even be darkened for all I know. I don't even know.
Maybe it's not even that clear.
Right. And then on the right, after a photo, the process of making photo negatives, where we kind of take the reverse of an image, the exact reverse of an image. When you take its photo negative, that's where you get the very interesting, seemingly very clear face.
Yeah, very detailed face, which is really cool.
And this is the photo that really caused interest in the shroud. So the two of the most mysterious things about the shroud are, one, that when you produce it as a photo negative, it produces a 3D photorealistic face. And that is regardless a very hard thing to explain, and it's also very amazing.
Because we know this didn't show up yesterday, right? Like this didn't show up in the 50s. Right. We at least know that this is pretty old, right? I mean, how...
That's right. So the documented history of the shroud goes back to the 1350s. So I think it's a French knight brought this relic to a church and presented it as, I have the burial cloth. Now, fascinating how this French knight just suddenly has the burial cloth of Jesus Christ 1300 years later in France. But that was
at a time when that would have been like, you're now the guy, right? You're all of a sudden you did what everybody wants to be the person to do.
Yes. And so one of the reasons, even when you heard about dating, it actually being dated to much older than that is, and by the way, for people wondering about relics and things, for example, there is a face cloth that's a supposed faith cloth of Christ that has been tested, has blood and human sweat on it. We've known that relic has been in its location since at least the year 600, right? So that's a much older, very clearly documented thing we've had since the 600s, right?
Is it possible to have a face cloth and a giant shroud?
We will come back to the potential problems.
This is always the relic thing, right? It's like, there's enough, pieces of the cross in every monastery to, make 1,000 crosses.
To build a ship, as Erasmus once said.
That's right. It's true. And so this is where you get into the, wait a minute, how can all of this be true?
So the other fascinating thing about the Shroud of Turin is where it places the wounds on Christ, the stigmata, if we will, are in his wrists.
Shroud Talk.
That's
Talk.
Right. The wounds are in his wrists, not his hands. And so it's believed that would be that should prove to us its authenticity, since we know in most art Christ was pictured as having it through his hands. But as we became more familiar historically with the process of crucifixion, we know that if you were nailed through the hands, you would fall off, right?
So it had to be through the wrist. Weird that there's still so much stigmata that shows up in the palm of the hand. It's almost like it's inaccurate.
It would,
and based off of tradition and legend and myth.
So what you're saying is the problem is, if you want to present the wounds in his wrists on the shroud as a reason for its authenticity, we have to de-authenticate a gajillion stigmata miracles and a lot of other.
So many miracles and images that you have said are legit. It falls apart.
So you're saying the primary argument is that we're going to just argue whatever it takes for whatever the particular thing we're trying to defend.
If we like it, I mean, obviously, Roman Catholic apologists would never do this.
Right.
They would never just change how they argue depending on what they're trying to defend.
Well, and I would not say, unless history was so clear on this, I would not say that happened with the Shroud of Turin, except that it did. So when this night,
of course, what? That's crazy, man. So being when somebody who has never cared, I'm just so in shock that the Roman Catholic Church would ever do such a thing.
So the shroud was brought to the bishop in North France in 1389, and he immediately denounced it as an obvious forgery. Now, what's fascinating is then it continued to grow in popularity, but then in 1390, the next year, the Pope issued a papal bull declaring it an obvious forgery. But let's not throw it away because it's a representation of the Lord Jesus Christ. But we must say it's a painting or panel meant to imitate what was Christ was buried.
Wouldn't you almost love to be in the room where like that guy's just like, hey, like this is our thing. Like we produce this stuff in the church. We make the money from it. Like we're like it's the classic like elite versus this just showed up out of nowhere from who knows where. Like we didn't produce this one. We can't give our full legitimacy to it, but also we can't fully distance from it because that's going to cause its own problems. I would just love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation.
And so obviously later, as it grew in popularity, the Vatican eventually it's 1506 is when it was reduced. It was when this view. So for 100 years, by the way, 100 years, it was this papal bull that it was not real was accepted and was reversed, I'm sure, by just so much overwhelming evidence found in 1506, and that it should be venerated with a mass and given an office. And
what also makes me think it must be legit is we know that was not the kind of time that they would have just accepted a lot of relics, right? Like they were really careful about what kind of relics they were accepting into the church.
They were so careful that a few years later, Erasmus was like, this is the most out of control part of our piety, was the amount of relic production. But the real interest in it, the like modern interest in it, occurred after that photo negative was produced, because then a lot of the explanations for the shroud seem to stop to make sense. So the big problem with it producing a photo negative is that a human cannot paint a 3D photo negative. It's a weird thing. It just can't be done. You could be looking at a photo negative and not paint one. And so people who are anti-shroud propose lots of theories of how it was faked, how it was forged. And unfortunately, a lot of their theories don't hold up. So it's been tested a lot. They've looked for paint, they've looked for all these things. And actually, most of the external and skeptical theories don't hold up. Now, Pastor Michael, should we start? So we have 3 more things to do. I think a good explanation of where the shroud comes from, the biblical reason we absolutely have to reject this, and then we're going to do the 5 points of Calvinism on the Shroud of Turin, because as our listeners may not know, John Calvin wrote a treatise on relics and wrote an entire section giving his views of the Shroud of Turin. So we're going to run through that. So where would you like to start? Would you like to start with the explanation, the biblical reason the Shroud of Turin is definitely a forgery, or John Calvin's view?
Let's do Calvin to the modern explanation that you want to give, and then also the biblical view. I think it'd be good at kind of closing the biblical view along with some of what we said we'd talk about.
Great. So Calvin obviously also will appeal to the Bible.
Exactly,
so we will.
Yep. But it just follows history, right? I feel like we got up to the 1500s. Let's just get there with Calvin.
Great. So Calvin writes, he has kind of 5 seconds, and I'm going to use these titles from the copy of the Treatise on Relics. I don't know if these titles of these sections are original with Calvin or are like someone offering summary sections. So just to be clear on that. So the first one is Calvin says and he does this with relics throughout the world. So even remember that face covering I mentioned that, wow, that's actually been there since the year 600. Calvin gives his view on that. His first reason that we're actually not going to accept that one is, well, there are tons of face cloths throughout the world. And so he's right. So he's already started there. But first, the reason he would say he rejects the Shroud of Turin is there is no mention in scripture of a miraculous icon made without hands. So that this idea that Jesus's body was miraculously imprinted onto this linen, he's saying, how could this wondrous miracle completely escape the evangelists? So that not a word about the impression of the Lord's body was stamped onto his grave clothes.
Yeah. Even just thinking, I've been preaching through the Gospel of John. John is, and maybe it's best to do Calvin with the biblical side, because we're just going to naturally.
Yep.
So John was there, right? Like John was one of the first ones to reach the tomb after Mary declared the resurrection to the disciples. And Peter ran into the tomb. John got to the tomb and looked around in it. And John is writing at a much later date than the other Gospels. And in part, at least, is clearly filling in things that the other Gospels don't include. Yes. He clearly, at least in some part, is trying to add something, the kinds of things that maybe they didn't talk about. You would expect, if this was what it really was, then you would see that showing up, especially in the Gospel of John.
Yes.
And you see nothing like that.
Yes. Yeah. This is the one of the problems. So then Calvin says his second point is this: scriptural history militates against the burial clothes having been taken by Christians. And so he says, again, nowhere in the Bible do we learn that the apostles or the women, any of the early Christians, when Jesus was resurrected, said, wait, we need to take his burial clothes. They don't do that. And if his tomb, sorry, I won't use Calvin's term for tomb. If his tomb was guarded by soldiers, it is very unlikely they would have been allowed to take things out of the tomb, especially because according to Matthew 28, 11 through 15, Pilate said, tell them they'd stolen away the body, right? There's a whole thing where even if there wasn't a miracle involved, being able to reproduce empty grave clothes, especially if it had his image on it, would have seemed to have been a thing that would have come up. All right. So number 3, Pastor Michael, and the final 3 are Calvin in this treatise, he really kind of works you up to where he's going. These first 2, it's like, oh yeah, these are good questions. 3 through 5 are brutal takedowns. Number 3, the shroud is obviously fake. He said that this is an imposture should be detected by anyone who looks at the impression made on this. And he says, I do not cease to wonder how those who have framed this are so dull of understanding that this could not be made by craft, though it seems so transparent.
It's just like, you guys are so stupid.
Yeah. How were they so silly? Were they blindfolded that they were unified in the matter and not seeing this was transparent?
I know that, and I know some people might hear that and be like, but isn't that kind of harsh? But tell me you haven't thought the same thing about other relics or miracles, or even, even within the Protestant world. Like, here's this incredible thing. Look, this guy fixes people's back by making one of their legs grow slightly longer than the other because it was just a little too short. Isn't that miraculous? And yes. You see that, and there is this instant, that's so obviously ridiculous. It's so obviously fake. It's so obviously a parlor trick. How could you possibly fall for that? And they do. Like, that's it. It's common, actually. So I get it. That's
and making room for that, for the sake of like charity or whatever, that kind of credulity and superstition is actually dishonoring to Christ and actual miracles.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
I mean, what, think about the signs that take place in the Bible. How do you like combat some of these signs? You're not combating them by just like everybody just doesn't believe it or something like that, right? The way that all these signs have to be combated in the Bible, whether we go back to Moses with the plagues in Egypt, whether we go to the miracles in Jesus' day, is we either have to show how we can reproduce this because everybody's believing in it, everybody sees it, everybody's experiencing it. Like, in other words, it can't be denied. Or you take the way that the Pharisees try to deal with it, the ruling elite in Jerusalem, and they were like, well, we better just kill everybody involved and lie about it, because that's the only way we can try to begin to convince people it's not right.
Yes.
And so, in other words, it's not actually the kind of thing that you can like, everybody believes it. Even the guys who are against it believe it because they saw it, because they saw a guy who was born blind and whose parents say he's born blind and everybody says he's born blind, and all of a sudden he can see, and that's never happened before, and everybody hears about it. Everybody. So like this is the kind of thing that you would expect from true signs when they take place. It's not that people just disbelieve because they're critical. The nature of a biblical sign is that it's hard to deny. So you have to cover it up by bloodshed.
Yes. Now, and let's answer. So I want to add to that two things. One, yes, this is why Jesus' opponents say by demons he casts out demons. They don't say, oh, it's not real. They say they have to offer an alternative explanation.
Yep, it's Pharaoh's magicians. Look, we can do it too. We can reproduce it by our demonic arts.
Yes, and then the other thing is people will say, well, like, if you have to have faith that a miracle happened. Wrong. Jesus says, if you won't believe me, at least believe on account of the signs themselves, because those are undeniable. Now, let me make one statement. How could Calvin make that kind of claim? He didn't see the photo negative, so maybe it was wrong. Well, there's actually one thing Calvin could have noticed. He doesn't write it. But if you were to cover your face with a cloth, and maybe you've done this when it was wet or something, the actual way a cloth would capture your face is not like a flat image you could look at.
Yes.
If it was around your face and then you flattened it out, it would look like a really wide, strangely flayed face.
Great
and point. So even on these, like, again, this is what Calvin means. On these kinds of basic observation points, this doesn't make sense. And obviously the way a person covers that ground is, but a miracle though, right? That is what
but you don't understand, man. This strengthened my faith.
Right.
I know people that were converted because they couldn't disprove this.
We're coming back to that at the end because, so here's number 4, and here's number 4 is the problem. This is the big, the end. This is the kind of the end of this. So number 4, the burial clothes were not a full body covering the face. So Calvin quotes from John 20. It is, again, it's an amazing thing we have here. So here is in verse number 4 from John 24. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first and stopped to look in. And he saw the linen cloths, which is plural. The King James says strips of linen. So linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Simon Peter came following him. He went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus's head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. So you actually understand why in the relic world there are so many more face cloth relics.
Yep.
Because we have a direct apostolic testimony that at least existed.
Yep.
The shroud, the 14-foot full body thing, never existed.
And even just historically, don't we know what kind of like cloth wraps were used in Judea at this time? It wasn't, I mean, to my knowledge anyway, it's not the shroud kind of wraps. Right? You're wrapping much thinner, smaller cloths around the body. You're not putting them inside of this like perfectly folded around you cloth made for your shape.
Right. And so now number 5, Calvin's number 5 thought on the shroud is the superstition and idolatry of relics. So his first point, well, one of his points is this, is that God took away Moses's body from human sight, lest the Jews should fall into idolatry worshiping it. Said, so the first abuse is that when we are ought to find Christ in the word and the sacraments and spiritual influences, we have basically given away to superstition, clinging to his garments, vests, swaddling clothes. And he said, likewise with the martyrs, and obviously we have lots of martyr relics and the apostles, our duty was to meditate diligently on their lives and attempt in imitating them. But men made their whole study to contemplate and lay up, as it were, a treasury of bones, shirts, girdles, caps, and similar trifles. So what's amazing about the Shroud Talk, Calvin basically settled this issue in the 1500s, in his lifetime. Where does that leave us? So that leaves us with actually this conviction biblically. The shroud is not real. And so as I've
not, what we it is not what authentic. It claims to be.
It is not
it's
authentic.
Not an authentic image, imprint, miraculously made of Christ that he was, buried in.
That's right. And so this critique, of course, would not work on every relic, but it certainly does on this one. And Calvin has critiques for virtually every relic he knew about on Earth. So, but as we've mentioned, a number of things about the shroud have defied many attempts to explain where it came from. Now, what's fascinating about this is that a N.D. Wilson, yes, that kind of N.D. Wilson, had a realization, and he did something that has made him today one of the leading people who can explain where the shroud actually comes from. And so the two things were, he basically, like us and Calvin, concluded biblically it's not real, therefore I have to explain it. Also, it does carbon date to the 1300s, so it lines up with where its documented history comes from.
And even just the historical connection, we at least know there was something like this, right? You could say maybe something else was made later and now took its place, but for the most part, we know there is true historical pedigree to this item.
That's right. Back to the 1300s, right? That's as far as we know. Now, again, there have been attempts to use different dating methods that are less reliable than carbon dating to date it to older. And there are lots of very curious things about it, right? You can't paint it. You actually can't just paint it on. There actually isn't just paint in it. There are a lot of interesting things about it. But what all of the reasons, the struggle with knowing where the shroud comes from is basically an idea of no one accepts medieval people as incredibly, we expect them to be lesser. So it's well, they must have just painted it on. And then people say, well, they couldn't have painted it on. It's a photo negative. And they go, well, they didn't know about that. They painted it on. And so the theory doesn't work. Or the way they would have put it on is one guy, he basically like invented a primitive camera what could produce a photo negative, and he put it on that way. And all of the problem they had with all of these methods were they basically doubted a medieval could figure out how to do this. And so, if they couldn't figure out how to do this because we know they weren't that smart, maybe it's miraculous.
Man, we always think those people are so dumb. Oh, but we do trust their relics. you ever think about that? Yeah. Man, those people were so dumb, but we do trust their relics.
Yes. And so what Andy Wilson, deciding to take a brief foray into this, decided was, he decided, well, what that means is if a medieval with the materials he had could do this, I should be able to recreate the Shroud of Turin.
Yep.
Now, Pastor Michael, I am going to show an image with you.
I'm so excited about this.
So, Pastor Michael, does this image look like, does this look like, if I hadn't told you, would you be like, oh yeah, that is
probably legitimately that? Now I feel like you're going to tell me that it's not, but it does look like it's just a photo that I've seen of the Shroud of Turin.
And like that photo
negative of it.
This is what it so here is the image. Here is here is the photo negative. These are the images he
So those
produced.
Two are different.
Yes.
Like from the top and the bottom, these are different.
They did it multiple times to kind of prove it, to prove what they were doing.
I mean, that legit looks like I'm 99% sure I've seen people share that exact image as the Shroud of Turin. That's what's so funny.
If you held up these images next to the ones from Wikipedia and said, are these the same? I think a lot of people would say they're the same. 2, if you said which one of these is the Shroud of Turin and which of these was made in 2005 in Idaho by a fiction author, no one would get the answer right. It would be
I bet that's so fun for Andy Wilson now that he's put these out into the world, that there's probably people that use these and he can just sit back and laugh because he knows he made that one.
So I am going so I will put a link in the show notes, which
it's legitimately amazing how similar this is.
To the website he started to host the research he did that allowed him to produce that, which is shadowshroud.com. So his logic was, I should be able to do this. And the problem that he realized that potentially people were getting wrong is the question had always been, how did they darken the linen? And he said, what if we decided the problem was, how did I lighten the rest of the linen to leave the image? We've always been asking, how do we get the image on? And he said, what if it started darker and then we lightened everything but the imprint? And he knew this from research and the medieval world. Do you know what medieval people did when their linen started to look bad, Pastor Michael?
I bet they did something to lighten them.
They did. Linen reacts with the sun. If you set out linen in the sun, housewives apparently for ages, you set your linens out. This is why you used white linens, because you could set them out in the sun to bleach them again.
Mm.
And so
fascinating.
So he said, what if we painted a piece of glass, like a realistic painting, put that over the linen so everything but what the painting covered would lighten, and we painted a face and the outline of a body, and that is what produced those images that you're like,
wow. And it does. And you guys, I'm not just saying this because I'm some like happy Protestant, although I am that too. It legitimately looks just like the images from the Shroud of Turin. It looks the same. It is, I would argue that it's indistinguishable to somebody who's not even an expert. So that if you just showed somebody on the street, hey, which one of these, like, are these the same image? Are these different? Which one is the Shroud of Turin? They would not be able to tell the difference.
Right. And it produces, importantly, the photo negative. It explains why there isn't paint and why it's not, but it is why it is a like superficial, why it's only on the exterior parts of like has explanatory power that is amazing, and it's so simple and elegant.
Yes.
It also makes sense if all of the people in the medieval world kind of knew you bleached linens this way, why the original reaction was, oh, it's a fake.
Right. Oh, we see how you could do that.
Yes. And one of his critics, like one of the pro Shroud people, said, I have never seen a theory of its origin that has actually shaken my faith in the Shroud until now. Like, because it's such a fascinating and powerfully explanatory device.
No kidding. And I mean, I know you're just hearing us talk about it. Go look at these images, guys. Seriously, go look at these images, and you will be like, oh, if he could produce this in a way that was knowable by people in the 1300s, oh, okay. Like, obviously that explains it.
Right.
In a time when this particular kind of image is what you would associate with the image of Christ because of all the paintings and all of the relics and all the icons. Yeah, okay, like that makes a lot more sense. It also makes a lot more sense why you have this big shroud instead of like actual ancient burial cloths.
Right. And so, because again, it's one of those interesting things where for all the things that were like, well, wow, how could they get all these things right? Well, they got wrong the most fundamental thing that most other relics, even older ones, got right, that it was a face cloth, that that it wasn't like this.
Man, it's a bummer that like we've come full circle to the point where people are once again so biblically illiterate that this just like that there's even a lot of Protestants that are like, oh yeah, so I think this might be right.
So Pastor Michael, let's come back around to those people. What about all the people this encourages, right? That the person who shared that AI image and said that how blessed they were to see the face of the Lord, like they got to see Jesus.
Yep.
Or the people that, because it was like that we going through and picking holes in all these things, right? We're ruining people's Christianity. That that they're just nice people that like this.
Yeah, let me take this two different ways.
Great.
Okay, number one, well, maybe I'll say three things, but the first way I'll take it is personal experience is not a proper way to make judgments. So is it possible that the Lord uses somebody's misunderstanding of what the shroud is to bring them to faith? Actually, yeah. Like God does a lot of stuff like that a lot of the time. And that's because our experience doesn't necessitate that like God is doing it through that image or something like that. It's actually maybe not tied to that at all. But our experience is that my faith is tied to that because I experienced it in this way. And all of us know this, by the way. All of us probably could think of an event that happened maybe when we were kids where our parents said something or did something or knew something that convinced us that they were just like, they were so smart or they knew everything. They were just like so incredible. And then later on you realize, oh no, I just thought, like I thought something happened or they said something that it wasn't actually true. It wasn't actually how it happened. But from my perspective, my experience in the moment, I couldn't explain it any other way. But actually, we don't have the best vantage point to understand how and why God works in certain circumstances like this, or like an altar call, or like you're in a really unhealthy church, but somehow you still come to faith, right? Like these things happen all the time, right? There are people that go into a cult and they actually find a way to hear the truth enough that they come to Christ. And then they leave that, right? And you could say, well, it was because of the cult, or it was because of this person, or it was because of this like revival night that I was at. But that's actually just it. You don't have the proper vantage point, and you're allowing that experience to be the central piece that you're looking at to explain it. And here's the other thing that I'd say. Now I go to like a biblical side of things. Go and read the Gospel of John and look at what it says about belief and trusting in Christ. It is possible to believe in Christ because of the signs that he did. People would do that. And again, we just mentioned the signs that Jesus did and that the apostles did and that Moses did. These are of a totally different category as what you see in the Roman Catholic Church, as what you see in a lot of the Pentecostal movement. They are seismically different.
Right.
But even if, even if we were to accept that there's some of this is truly a sign from the Lord, mature and healthy faith always, every time, even when it starts by seeing a sign, is always based upon the word of Christ. Every single time. So there's many examples. Go just read through the Gospel of John where people might see something that Jesus does, but when they truly believe is when they go and they speak with him, they hear his word. Over and over, we see that belief is based on the word of God. The people in Samaria who hear the testimony of this woman, of a sign that she encountered when she met Jesus, and Jesus told her at this well, what she explains is, he told me everything I ever did. Right? That's a pretty strong, like that's a pretty radical sign type experience. And she goes and tells people about this. But then what they do is they actually go and they hear the words of Jesus for themselves. And at the end of it all, they say it's no longer because of what you said, talking to the woman of Samaria. It's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world. They talked to Jesus face to face, but it was not seeing him in that way that caused them to believe. What was it? Hearing his word over and over. That's the case, right? Over and over. Why do the apostles, not leave him when so many of his disciples left him when he said that, he is the bread that comes down from heaven? Because they said, what does Peter say? He says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And we have, you have the words of eternal life, and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. Why? He doesn't say because of these signs that you did, we believe. Now, it's not to say that God doesn't use that wasn't important. But signs always point somewhere. They drive you somewhere. And always mature faith is based upon the word of God every single time.
Right. I completely agree. And this is also, this is the reason for the second commandment, to not make an image of God, is because the place you are supposed to find him is in the word. And as Calvin says, the sacraments, that these things distract people. And this is the actually concerning thing. I agree with Pastor Michael. All of us, every single person's conversion involved sin, involved unbiblical things. That's how God always works. But we have to continue to insist, for the sake of both just honesty and the glory of Christ. The Bible does not ever ask you to believe in something that is false, even for the sake of your faith or whatever. It never asks you to believe something that is false. And if the shroud is, if things like this, and again, there are many examples of this modernly and historically. This kind of credulity and superstition we'll put it this way. It's not Jesus. It's a painting that was used linen. It was put on linen through the sun. There's no assurance, right? The problem with this is you should have no assurance in it of anything. And even if it was put there by some sort of miraculous or unexplained thing, There would still be no reason to believe in it. And this is the problem. This is where we are. This is the path to no assurance. This is the path to superstition. This is the path to idolatry. And seems to be the path we're on again, which is why John MacArthur called the modern evangelical churches more in need of reform than even the late medieval Roman Catholic one. Well, Pastor Michael, this was Restless
Shroud Talk.
Shroud Talk.
Shroud Talk.
Give us 5-star. Give Shroud Talk a 5-star review. Give us a 5-star review, and in your review, write Shroud Talk. If this was helpful for you, we pray that you will go on and you will read the word and find in them the words of life. So join Restless next week for something I'm sure very different